Well, hey, all you wiretappers. Good to be back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I have another former cop or retired copper from not too far away from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he has a heck of a story. He's written a book about it, and but it's a heck of a story. Down in Tulsa, Oklahoma, they've got a mob murder. Well, now mob murders don't just go down every day in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and it's a really interesting story that ties clear back to the highlight business down in Florida, to the Winter Hill Gang in Boston, Massachusetts, to Whitey Bulger, really, and a hitman named John Marandino, and to a one of the infamous corrupt FBI agents out of Boston. They seem to have had a problem in the Boston FBI for a period of years there, and three of their guys end up going to jail over probably being a little bit overly they forgot where the line was, it looks to me like. But anyhow, it's retired detective Mike Huff. Welcome, Mike.
Well, hey, welcome to you too. Thank you for doing this.
All right, Mike. Now, tell us a little bit about your career. How'd you come up through the ranks in Tulsa PD?
Well, I started in January of 1975. I got promoted to a detective in 1980. I didn't much like it. It wasn't enough action. I had a good career on the street, but I liked my supervisor a lot. So I stuck with this being a detective. In May of 81, May 27th, I just got to work. I was checking on a guy that I had shot 3 weeks earlier who was in intensive care. We're just sitting there and we're talking about we're going to eat supper. And I was on the phone with the hospital checking on this guy's condition. And police radio came on, said, need all the homicide detectives to head out to Southern Hills Country Club on a shooting. I guess 5 of us that night, we headed out there. And, Southern Hills, even at that time, before a lot of all the major golf tournaments they've since had, was a very, well, it was the kind of place that I wasn't familiar with. It was everybody with money had was part of that country club, and I wasn't one of that crowd. There's a middle-aged man slumped over in the seat of the car. He'd been shot between the eyes. It was a little bit foreign to me. I'd been a homicide detective for a year and had been to a good bunch of homicides, but most of them were, street murders or domestics, things like that. And so I knew this one was going to be a bit different, but I didn't know how different this was going to be. I think I was 25 at the time. My supervisor told me this was going to be in charge of the scene. And so we started making assignments. Very little evidence at the scene. There were 4 live rounds laying right outside the opened doorway of Mr. Wheeler's Cadillac. That was pretty puzzling. This was right near one of the really nice swimming pools out there, and we found a few witnesses. People had seen this car. It looked out of place. I don't know why anybody hadn't, had somebody check it out. A couple guys sitting in the car.
Now, Mike, tell us a little bit about how'd you figure out who this guy was? He was pretty well known in Tulsa, and that's a pretty well known country club. Guy, just for your information, the Southern Hills Country Club is a premier golf course here in the Midwest, and is nothing but high end rich oil people in Tulsa, I believe, mainly went to that. And so, tell us about how you figured out who this victim was. He had a nice car.
Well, the people were abuzz and said, you don't know who this guy is. He owns Telex Corporation. Well, that didn't mean a whole lot to me. Other than they said, he employs thousands of people. This was a time that was before Google or the internet or cell phones or anything. I think I had a police radio, and I don't even think pagers were invented yet. Communication was tough. You know, the word started trickling in of who he was. I guess we were probably out at the scene for 6 or 7 hours and documenting it and getting our pictures and all that kind of scene
Uh,
work. We went
Mike,
back to the station, detective area, we called it the bullpen. The bullpen was filled with brass, people they'd called in and whatever. The word was there was going to be a 13-man task force formed on this deal, and they started breaking that out. Boy, for some reason, I sure thought I wanted to be on it, and I got the word to the sergeant that there is a scene in the book that we wrote. This Sergeant Roy Hunt was a legend. He had solved murders for decades. I really liked him. He liked me. He pulled me to the side and he said, "Hey, if you get involved in this, it's probably going to change your life." And he said, "You got a pretty good career down here. So, you know, this is probably going to screw it up, you know, if it doesn't kill you." I mean, I was so young, green, that I said, "Oh man, I don't want to do this." He said, "All right, let's drink to it." So he pulled out a bottle of whiskey and a couple shot glasses from his desk.
the good old
And
days.
so we had a drink about it. You know, I wasn't the only guy involved. I mean, involved in that task force. After about a couple weeks, the leads started dwindling. It boiled down to me and a really good fellow named Dick Bishop. We got assigned a case. You know, it was a good learning experience for me. I had Dick Bishop. I had my sergeant. You know, we were, for some reason, in 1981, that was a big homicide year for Tulsa. We had close to 80 homicides. I was working around the clock. You know, I mean, I'd pick up a grounder here or there on top of this. And
Yeah.
so we stayed busy, but we got a call from the state police in Massachusetts. And they said, "Hey, you guys need to be up here." Actually, Dick and Sergeant Roy Hunt went to Boston. I didn't make that trip. I was working another homicide.
Let me ask you a question here. At this point in time, I know a red ball like that, a hot case like that, where the phones light up at first with all kinds of bad leads and crazy leads, and yeah, everybody's running down all these leads. But you mentioned that there was a car in the lot that somebody mentioned was suspicious. Was that had you figured out that was the car that had been occupied by whoever killed Roger Wheeler?
Yes, sir. It was the late 70s, probably a 79 or 80 Ford LTD, four door. Two guys with beards were in the car, and somebody got a partial tag. That partial tag, I mean, we had conflicting information about even the partial tag. I mean, we had a couple of witnesses with different partial tag
Yeah.
numbers, and these guys were pros. They had stole the tag off a similar car. It was a huge dead end, but it took so much effort to follow that lead. This was a time when, you know, it was just tell times. You couldn't sit down in front of the computer
Yeah.
and do anything because there weren't computers. You know, that was a lead that we worked on. We also got a lead very early on that put us on to the Dixie Mafia, and those were some bad guys. Uh, the main guy, or the guy that was suggested as the shooter, resembled a composite drawing. We had an artist do a composite, and they were great composites. But somebody said, "Hey, that looks like Pat Early, Dixie Mafia guy," and he was the kind of guy that he would travel to do violence, got involved in labor disputes, things things of that nature, and he lived down in southern Oklahoma. The other guy was a believed to be a bondsman in Oklahoma City. We took off on that lead, and I spent close to a couple months, off and on 3 or 4 days a week in Oklahoma City. We did surveillance on these guys. We're trying to catch them up short doing something. They were also dealing some or smuggling some pretty good quantities of drugs. We worked on that for with the state narcotics unit for months till we finally caught them dirty with a pretty good load of drugs.
That's interesting, Mike. How you start in a murder investigation, and I've seen this happen here. You start in a murder investigation, and all of a sudden, something else comes in that may have something to do with it and may not. But then you get sidetracked onto that. Then it looks good, and you stay on that for a while, and then you have to come back. When you go to Boston, you have very little leads. You don't, yeah. I mean, you've got this car and this composites and a bunch of other dead ends that weren't that. Did you have anything at that point in time that led you to believe that this reached outside of Oklahoma City or in that area?
No, we had nothing. I mean, we had just a few phone calls. Other people knew more about our case and how it hooked to Boston than we did.
Yeah.
There was no way to research it, and
What about
so
Roger Wheeler? What about Roger Wheeler? Did you know about his connection to the High Lie down in Florida at that point in time? He was a big businessman, but he had invested in this World High Lie business in Florida.
when we started looking at this thing, of course, the brass was making decisions. Of course, that never helps out when you're a detective trying to find the truth, and the brass strictly knows in it. But the brass sat down with the FBI. They said, "Hey, this Dixie Mafia lead looks pretty good. We're gonna follow that lead. We know about Wheeler and this parimutuel gambling business, Highlight, which if people don't know what that is, if they ever watched the first of Miami Vice, there
Yeah.
was a spot in the trailer on that, and it was filmed at World Highlight down in Miami. And these guys have these big baskets hooked to their arms, and they're on a court with a granite wall, and they catch this ball with this basket, and then with the weight or force of their entire body, they hurl this very hard ball called a pelota up against this wall, and they're basically playing handball. And the crowd sits behind the screen.
There's huge amounts of money bet on that too.
Yes, there was a lot of money, and
Roger Wheeler had taken some of his money that he'd made in these other businesses and bought this whole High Lie organization, World High Lie, which ran the games. And then also, were they involved in the parimutuel betting on that and the gambling on that?
yes, and World Highlight had five. They call them frontons. They're about the size of a pretty good size indoor arena, and there were four of them in Florida, and there was one in Hartford, Connecticut. We stuck our nose into it and started looking at it. And then the brass says, "Hey, we made a deal with the FBI. The FBI is going to handle all the potential organized crime leads, and you guys stick on this stuff local or nearly local." Didn't like it at all. I was a 25-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Pretty
What are you
much.
gonna do? Now you had
Yeah.
a call. You had a call from the Massachusetts Highway Patrol. I interrupted you back then, and this is going to start leading you outside of Tulsa back to Florida and to Boston. So what was that about?
Yeah. We went up there and they told us about this Irish mob. It's a loose knit organized crime group. They said, here's some guys to take a look at, because I was coordinating a deal where we were going through boxes and boxes of paper records from every hotel in Tulsa, looking for something that stood out, maybe a tag number or an out of state reference to where somebody came from that we would follow up on those leads. They gave us some names for us to look for also, like somebody used their true name checking into a hotel where they're doing a mob hit. But I did what I was told. I was buried in boxes of paper. When I wasn't down in Oklahoma City chasing these drug dealers, this Pat Early, he worked for a guy that was that bought bad debt markers from I think it was Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and he'd go out and break legs and stuff. Here we had two different angles, or actually even more than that, because Mr. Wheeler was a complicated man and was involved in a lot of businesses, and there's a lot of stuff going on. I was like a kid in a toy store with all these things to, here I'm chasing a drug smuggler, here I'm chasing a guy, and let me tell this about Pat Early and this Dixie Mafia. And the Dixie Mafia were responsible for shooting up Buford Pusser and killing Buford Pusser's wife. Buford Pusser was the McNairy County, Tennessee sheriff that they made a movie of called Walking Tall.
Yeah.
And so they shot him up, killed his wife. I mean, there was just so many crimes that we were coming across that I can speak for myself. We lacked focus because there was so much stuff going on. I still wanted. I was still a little bit upset about the FBI was going to handle the highlight angle, but checking for airplanes. This guy that Pat Early worked for, he owned a company that specialized in outfitting airplanes for international drug smuggling. And I mean, you couldn't spit without hitting some other motive.
Really?
You know how that goes. So you just get in the crowd.
How did you get your focus back, and how did you end up on this highlight connection? Was that because of the FBI or because of the Boston, Massachusetts Highway Patrol? How'd you get back to that?
Well, we got involved with the state police in Boston a little bit. We didn't know how we could do this. Boston was, they said, well, we'll check and see, and if anything comes up, we'll tell you. Well, then we got hooked up with the Connecticut State Police, who were overseeing the investigations on Jai Alai in Connecticut, where Wheeler owned a facility. So I was still just on the fringes of Jai Alai. And then in the fall, I believe it was, of 81, Dick and I are sitting at our desk one evening. Somebody barges into the detective division, told the receptionist that, hey, I want to see the detective who's working my dad's murder case. My name's David Wheeler. They called me back there and said, this irate guy wants to talk to you. So I did that. I brought him back to the bullpen. We sat down. I've been waiting for you to come talk to me, but all that's been coming out of the woodwork is FBI agents. I said, well, we were told that the FBI would handle you as their source of information. They haven't really said very much about it. We have meetings with them, but nothing really comes out. I think World Highlight got my dad killed, and I think a retired FBI agent was involved in it. And I've told the FBI that, and they won't listen to me. So here I am. My psychiatrist told me to come talk to you.
Now, this Wheeler, his son, he helped you write that book. He had some input into that book, correct?
Oh, he had a lot of input in the book.
So in that book, you're going to have kind of
the here in a minute, but
okay. You're going to have the personal side. You're going to have the law enforcement side of the murder of Roger Wheeler.
yes.
Okay.
We found as we started dealing with him that Mr. Wheeler was just a busy millionaire businessman, self-made businessman. You know, he might have had his flaws, but he wasn't a crook. He had legitimate businesses. He just had made so much money on a pipeline business that he had big, big amount of money that he could invest. And so he had gone to somebody that he had dealt with before, the Bank of Boston, and said, "Hey, find me something to invest in that I'd make money, and just bring me whatever it is, and I'll take a look at it." Offered him a casino. They offered Highlight. So he started looking at this, and he had sent his son David down to look at uh, these businesses and put together some sort of computer program. David did, and it came back that Highlight had the most potential to make money, and the tax incentives were there in that business. So his dad said, "I'm going to buy this one." That was in the late 70s. What had happened? The business was run by a guy from Boston, CPA. It turned out that he hired several retired FBI agents. One of them was a fellow by the name of Paul Rico, to allegedly keep the business clean from organized crime. Paul Rico was a legendary FBI agent that had developed many mob informants while they were trying to stamp out the Italian mob. And so, as he was nearing retirement, he had moved to Florida for his last year or two, was hired by World Highlight before Mr. Wheeler owned it. And that was something that attracted Mr. Wheeler. He felt safe with these FBI agents working there. And then immediately it started not making the money that they thought it should make. It was a real problem. Then it turns out that I run a World Highlight, a guy named John Callahan. Connecticut State Police figured out that he was hooked up with the Winter Hill Gang in Boston. He had to resign, and he was replaced by his business partner, a guy named Dick Donovan, another CPA. Wheeler was stuck with this guy because, as a part of the Bank of Boston approving that loan, they said, "We want Donovan to stay on as president." By early 1981, things were just not looking good in the business. He was arguing a lot with Donovan. David Wheeler had planned to fire Donovan and Paul Rico, and that was just relayed from Wheeler to his son just a couple weeks before the murder.
Now, Mike, this Paul Rico, I was looking up a little bit about him. By the time he retired, or maybe shortly after, it came out that he was involved with an informant named Joe the Animal Barboza, who had done a murder of a guy named Teddy Deegan, but Rico wanted a guy named Peter Lamone and three other members of the Italian La Cosa Nostra mob to go to jail for this Teddy Deegan, and Rico stood back and allowed Barboza to perjure himself and let these guys go down. Now, in the end, they'll end up getting released from prison when it all comes out several years later and get like a, I don't know, multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the FBI and U.S. The Department of Justice because of that case. So he was, he had a history, and plus Boston FBI, that's the place where John Connolly, the FBI agent who came along after Rico, was there. We say Rico like Rico Law, but H. Paul Rico And John Conley was a kind of a junior agent that then moved in and had all these informants, and the Irish mob continued going after the Italian mob. And then he ends up going to prison behind all that. So that was, I tell you, that Boston FBI was a snake's nest. It was not good at all. And so Rico was now working in the Winter Hill gang, who he's been protecting and using as informants over the years to get the Italian mob. They're siphoning money. They're what are they embezzling money out of the World High.
For the sake of the charge, we proved that they were just trying to take control World High Life so they could really get the money. We just hadn't figured out how the money was coming out at that time. That was a big hang up on filing charges. I mean, this thing, we're fast forwarding ahead close to 20 years till we get to this point. But, we suspected Rico was involved. May of 1982, a couple guys get gunned down in Boston. One of them's named Brian Halloran. The other was Michael Donahue, who was just giving Halloran a ride. And Donahue's dad was sergeant on the Boston Police Department. We didn't hear about it. Nobody told us about this until finally a reporter called the police department and said, "Hey, you guys need to know this." That's how we learned about it, and that's how we dove into the Boston angle at this time.
Wait a minute, remind me, how did that murder in Boston connect to the High Lie and Roger Wheeler?
Right. Well, I found out after a couple months, Brian Halloran had gone to the FBI and said, "Hey, I got offered this hit out in Tulsa. I got thinking about it, and I decided I didn't want to do it." It was a hit for Paul Rico. He wanted Wheeler dead. John Callahan, the former president of World High Lie, wanted Wheeler dead. He declined the hit. They gave him $20,000, said, "Keep your mouth shut." And he got jammed up in another murder in January of 1982 in Boston, and that was his ticket was the Wheeler murder. An FBI agent might have been the guy behind it. So the FBI never told us that. By this time, we had figured out. Of course, the FBI was screwing us over every day, and we learned that from David Wheeler back in the fall of '81. And the police department told me, he said, get to know this guy, figure out if he's crazy or what, because he had a passion. His dad was dead, murdered, and the FBI wouldn't listen to him. And so he turned to us, and the police department turned to me, and I was the rookie detective, closer to David Wheeler's age. Dick Bishop was older and had no patience, as we all get.
Yeah.
So, but I got to say, Dick was a great guy. We came back after meeting with Wheeler for days, and we met with the brass, the chief, and everybody else. Said, "Hey, the FBI is screwing us. We gotta get into this ourselves because the FBI is hiding this stuff from us." Within a couple months, Halloran got murdered. We went to Boston. We met with all these state police and stuff up there, and they were doing their best to help us as much as they could. But this was a rat's nest of corruption and disputes between agencies. The FBI hated everybody. Everybody else hated the FBI. Nobody could trust anybody. They were trying to do wiretaps. They were getting burned on wiretaps, against these Winter Hill mobsters. So they said, "I don't know how you're going to solve this." So I said, "Well, let's just go to what they called a strike force prosecutor that his section handled all the organized crime prosecutions, federal prosecutions in New England." They said, "Well, he's got to be involved in this deal with Halloran. He'd be the guy." I said, "Well, let's go talk to him." And little did I know that in Boston, you could drink a couple beers a shift and get by with it. They didn't have that problem. So we had a couple beers at lunchtime. And we went over to the federal courthouse and said, "Hey, we're here to meet with a fellow by the name of Jeremiah O'Sullivan, who was the head strike force prosecutor in the Department of Justice." So it went in there, and we were getting stonewalled by him, taking notes like crazy, throwing stuff at him, saying we had information that the corruption had infiltrated into the FBI in Boston. John Conley, like you said. This guy was around during Rico's time. He said, well, Rico was connected with the Winter Hill Gang. Well, we know what that means when you're a cop. You know, if somebody says they're connected to something else, that means they're part of them. And he said, you know, Rico liked to carouse and gamble and play cards with these mobsters when he was on the job. So I'm hearing this. I mean, I'm a young kid. At this point in time, I didn't know how to even that people fix tickets occasionally. I mean, and I'm hearing them talk about carousing with mobsters and stuff. And I said, well, I just want to know who made the decision to cut Brian Halloran loose and not tell us about it. He said, well, that was my decision. By this time, I was just getting pissed. I said, well, that was a bad decision. He's dead. It's our case. Who gave you the right to make a decision about our case? It just went downhill from there. Myself and a couple other detectives, wonderful reports, which quoted him verbatim, which later came back to bite him as we both were testifying before Congress. My reports caught him in a lie. He got charged with lying to Congress. He tried to turn the tables on me, and a good police report's the only thing that saved me. So for the young cops out there, making a good police report is paramount to what you do when you're trying to prove a murder. So I told him, I said, well, we're up here and we're going to find John Callahan, the former president of World Highlight. I said, we're going to make him snitch. I have no idea why I said it that way. And everybody else was looking at me like, what the hell are you saying? And,
I can imagine.
I mean, I had no business to open my mouth in that meeting as a young guy. So we went looking for Callahan up in Boston, went everywhere, had a drink about every bar we went to. We had a drink for about 3 days, which I'm sorry I'm saying that. You know, I just followed the crowd. We stayed there for a week or so. We headed back to Tulsa. I walked in my door. I am walking in my door with my suitcase in my hand and the phone's ringing. So I answered it. And somebody said, hey, is this Detective Mike Huff? Yes, sir. He said, are you looking for John Callahan? I said, I just came in the door from looking, and we've been up in Boston looking for him for about a week. And he goes, well, I've got him. I said, well, great. Where are you? He said, I'm at the Miami International Airport. He had introduced himself as a detective from the Metro-Dade Police, John Parmenter. And he said, I'm at the airport. I got him in the trunk of his car, and he's got a dime on his chest. And he was all shot up, and he's dead. Oh, wow. First thing that came to my mind is, you know, I just told the head of the strike force, this high-level Department of Justice prosecutor, that we were going to make him a snitch. And less than a week later, he's dead in the trunk of a car in Miami. I mean, it just about knocked me over. I felt like I was potentially responsible for his death. I didn't like the feeling at all. And as a 25-year-old kid, 26, this was just too much for me to process. So I immediately went down to the station, met with the chief and all the brass, Dick Bishop, obviously. He'd come from home too because we just got home. So I said, hey, we got a problem. They said, it sounds like you need to be in Miami. So we started putting together a trip to Miami, met the detective that was down there. when I got that phone call, I believe on August 3rd, 1982, when they said Callahan was dead, I said, well, let me talk to the detective that's going to work the case. And he said, well, he's on his way to Boston. Can you get a message to him? I was thinking, get a hold of him at a hotel or whatever. They said, well, he's not going to be at a hotel. He's made arrangements to stay at an FBI agent's house that's working on this case up there in Boston. I said, oh my God, he cannot stay at an FBI agent's house. They're in this up to their eyeballs. Turned out, made a handwritten note, laid it on his desk, knowing he's probably not going to be back for a week. And that's where that note stayed till he had spent a week with the FBI up there. You know, he was a great guy, Shelton Merritt. We called him Grits. Um, so I met him down in Miami, and he's just shaking his head, and I'm shaking my head. Everybody's shaking their head. We have no clue what we're going to do. At this point in time, the brass of all these agencies had just pretty much given us carte blanche and said, go do what you need to do. And Dick, being a lot wiser than I was, said, well, they just set us up for failure. And so we're going to wind up getting screwed on this deal because they're not going to take any blame for anything that goes wrong. And without a doubt, something's going to go wrong. And boy, was that true. We dug into this. We got everybody to come out to Tulsa and have a meeting. We arranged an informal task force amongst Miami, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Connecticut State Police, and the Massachusetts State Police. We were just shaking our heads trying to figure out what to do, spending taxpayers' money like it was going out of style. Everybody's flying around here and there. We kind of put the logistics together, who was going to investigate what, who we were going to target, try to get some information out of. Within a couple months after that, the FBI gave us a call, and they're dealing with David Wheeler and saying, oh, this isn't going to be connected to the FBI. We're going to drop this case. And then the next thing you know, we would do something and they they would come back into the case because they were trying to figure out what we were doing. And so they decided they wanted to bring all the detectives together from all these states to Oklahoma. They said they wanted to have a information sharing meeting. They put us up in nicest hotel, put everybody else up in nicest hotel in Tulsa. I mean, the food and the liquor flowed for about 3 days. We were just trying to avoid the FBI, talk with all these guys in this little informal task force. And so finally, on the last day of this meeting, which was held at the federal courthouse here in Tulsa, a guy from FBI headquarters, and he was a very high level guy named Sean McWeeny, stood up and said, we have to know everything incriminating that you have on Paul Rico. By this time, if we had rocks or bottles or something, they would have been thrown at him. And we said, we got nothing to tell you because we can't trust you. He said, well, here's the deal. Paul Rico came out of retirement and did a favor for the FBI. He went undercover to a corrupt federal judge by the name of Alcee Hastings, and we're going to arrest him. Alcee Hastings, we have to turn everything that you have over in discovery to whoever Hastings' lawyer is going to be. So, I mean, that disbanded that meeting as quick as it could. Well, I said, we got nothing to say to you. People left. I mean, people were going to a phone trying to get their airline reservations changed, go get suitcase. I mean, was just, it looked like a bunch of guys running from a stolen car after a pursuit. I mean, these guys just ran out of there.
Great
And
analogy.
it turns out they did arrest Alcee Hastings, and he was acquitted. he later became a U.S. Senator in Florida.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the high-level stuff that we were dealing with, it just put a stain on what was going on. I mean, there was no way. I mean, I was looking at all this stuff, and I said, "There is no way that I am smart enough even be in this room. I probably need to go back to patrol."
Mike, at this point in time, I mean, you're almost like stymied. That was ingenious on their part. Now, if I see a conspiracy theory here, I could see that Rico knew people were after him, and he wanted to know what you knew, and you weren't speaking to the FBI, so he could volunteer to go work a case on a corrupt judge, and then that have to know everything you got on him for discovery. I mean, they could potentially had got court orders from a judge in that criminal trial to say, bring it to Tulsa and all the other different jurisdictions and say, you have to give us that, and you had to give us, then he would have known. So it's, I don't know, that's a conspiracy theory that maybe it's a leap too far. It's pretty sophisticated, but I think it's possible, don't you?
Oh, yes, sir, Gary. I my head was spinning.
I can imagine.
I went to my dad, March 14th, 1983. I went to my dad and I said, I think I got to step back, maybe volunteer to go back to a police car because I'm in way over my head. My dad said, no, there's no way you can step back because you are in way over your head and you can't run from this. He said, you're right in the middle of a cesspool of corruption. You can't do this. You can't walk away from it. Well, that was the last time I talked to my dad because the next afternoon he was taking a nap and he died of a heart attack in
Oh,
his
wow.
sleep. That is something I detail in this book, along with many other things. But we were writing the book. I talking about that story, and not until then did I really soak in that my dad's funeral was on St. Patrick's Day, and I was right in the middle of all this Irish corruption and Irish mob. A friend of mine just said, "Hey, that was a sign. You were just too stupid to realize it." I believe he's right. From that point on, I never thought about leaving this case. Of course, a few years later, this case had caused me a little bit of a divorce, and I needed to make a little bit more money, so I promoted to sergeant. But I had made a deal with the brass when I made sergeant that I'd have to go back to patrol for a little bit to learn how to be a sergeant. They'd bring me back in to run the homicide squad when it all worked out.
Can't give away everything that's in the book. I know there's a lot more that's going to happen to get to Paul Rico, and you end up getting to him. And so, guys, you got to get this book. Now, I have one last question here about this George Marandino, who eventually will admit to this murder. And eventually it comes out that this murder does tie back to the Winter Hill Gang, and the guy that did it admitted to it and is out there today running around free.
Yeah, it's John Marandino. Boy, there are so many stories, just like you said, Jerry, so many stories in this book that it's just so hard to share this trivia that comes through here. In 1995, I had learned that some young state policemen who started working a loan sharking case came up with enough to charge Whitey Bulger with some racketeering. So I heard about that and I said, well, I'm going to make I took 60 pounds of reports. I mean, I made, I just stood in front of a copy machine for a couple days. And I had reports that were Boston Intel guys from back in the 70s that they had to purge. And so they were no longer in, but I didn't have to purge them. I didn't know them.
Yeah.
So I took all these reports up there. I had a suitcase with a roller attachment to it. I rolled in these reports to the U.S. Attorney's Office to a guy named Fred Wyshak. I'm from Tulsa, and I'm working this case, and I just want you to know that you're getting ready to step into knee-deep corruption. So I got these reports that I'd like to share with you because you're going to come across my case in it. So it turns out that, we started working with them a little bit. Back in the late 80s, I had a call from some TV people, and they said, "Hey, we're from a TV show. We'd like to put you on our pilot show, our very first one, and it's called Unsolved Mysteries. We'd like to feature your case." That was a time when there were just, three major networks. There wasn't a reality show. There weren't all these crime shows, podcasts, anything. We went up and down the ladder on that. Roger Wheeler's widow tried to block us from doing that. Chief made a good decision, said, "We're going to do it." So in that, I had learned of John Marandino. It even went back to some information back when our first trip to Boston in 1981. So Marandino had a felony warrant out for a horse race fixing conspiracy that they had worked up on him in the late 70s. So I showed his picture on this Unsolved Mysteries. And that was probably 86 or 87. Years later, in 1995, after this thing started unraveling up in Boston, somebody's watching a rerun of Unsolved Mysteries. A fella down in South Florida, and he sees me show this picture of Marano, and he said, "Hey, he don't go by that name, but that guy is a loan shark, and I've paid some money to him." That's how Marano's arrest came about, off of that guy calling in and saying that. I wish he had called me, but he had called the state police. That's how Marano got arrested. Once he gets arrested, I go visit him down in Latuna, Texas. He was staying in what they called the Valachi Suites. It was a suite of rooms where Joe Valachi lived out his life when he became a witness against the mob. I guess they used this suite for the most important witnesses that they need protection for and whatever. But I mean, Marano had his own small little kitchen. He had access to a toll-free phone, and he had private access to the rooftop exercise area. It was something. It was better than the first apartment I lived in. So, me and Marano kind of hit it off. He told me, he said, Unsolved Mysteries came out in the late 80s. He said, I was in Hawaii on vacation watching TV, and I saw you come on holding up my picture. And he said, I knew right then and there. He said, I've been worried about this murder, but I knew right then and there we were going to meet someday. It was interesting. Marano, I talked to him, multiple times, but the first time I talked to him, I spent 3 days with him. He had a story that went for decades. Uh, his involvement in organized crime, how he got involved in organized crime. As we were working through this, we brought him out to Tulsa, the U.S. Marshals did, and we had a small army put together. Me and him were in a car. I said, this is 20 years almost after this happened. I said, tell me what you can remember. He said, well, let's go out there to that country club. As we're going, he's saying, turn left here up at this light, and it's right up here on the right. And as you pull in, there's a guard shack that nobody was at the day it happened. And here's where we parked. And what I did, was I just went through, and every sentence or word that he said that would prove that this guy was the guy,
Yeah.
every bit of corroboration. I totaled them up, and there were 167 points of corroboration that only the killer would know. Then we went past the Wheeler's house, and he goes, "Yeah, I didn't like this one right here because their circle drive kind of comes out onto a busier street. I didn't want to get jammed up, sitting there waiting to get out in traffic. And oh, here's his parking space at Telex. It had his name on it, and sure enough, it did at the time." And he goes, "Oh, and there's a Catholic school across the street, and I didn't like this one because I'm Catholic, and I didn't want to do it right in front of a Catholic school." I mean, just stuff like that.
Yeah.
That really showed me. I mean, by this time, I'm kind of a decent investigator. So I'm seeing the level of a report that I was doing and comparing it to a level of a report that the FBI or some other agency was doing. They were just pounding square pegs into round holes on their cases, and we were intricate with facts and details. I mean, that was something I really recognized at the time.
Did Marandino, did he then give up Rico?
Yes, he did give up Rico.
Okay.
And he gave up Stevie, the rifleman, Flemmy. He told us that Joe McDonald was the driver. And I tell you, if you ever watch that movie Bullet, Joe McDonald became close to a movie maker, and the movie maker was making a mob movie. And so he wanted somebody tell him what it was like to be in to be in the mob. So McDonald told him. Eventually, that guy made a movie called Bullet.
Yeah.
And in that big chase scene in Bullet, Joe McDonald was the passenger in the car being chased by Steve McQueen in the movie. He was the actor. The car getting chased, he was the guy with the shotgun. That was Joe McDonald.
I'll be darned. So what happened to him? Did he go down?
Well, he
this?
died in
Oh, he died.
1982.
Okay.
Yeah. He got caught coming back from Florida on Amtrak. He got caught. Somebody snitched him off on the way, but he got caught in New York, and he had a machine gun in a suitcase. Me and Dick Bishop, we had our bags packed and getting ready to head out the door to the airport, and I got a call from the cops up in New York City, and they said, "You can stay at home because he ain't talking to anybody." And we asked him if he would talk to you guys, but he said, "I'm especially not going to talk to those guys." So he was a getaway driver on the Wheeler case. So Marlon gave up Rico, gave up Flemmy. Finally, we got Flemmy to talk, corroborate the Rico story. And we decided we had enough to arrest Rico. It took me forever to get the DA in Tulsa to file a charge. A little side issue that's in the book. I had, over the years, had heard that there was a guy in Boston that actually put the guns on a bus, and Marandino and McDonald picked up the guns at a bus station in downtown Tulsa to use. So I tried for several years to get that guy to talk to me. And he had a lawyer, and I talked to the lawyer every couple months and be the same answer. So finally, the last time that I tried, I said, "Hey, tell that guy," and this guy was a very huge Irish supporter. He had been arrested for smuggling guns to the IRA in Ireland.
Yeah.
And he's something. There's a bit about him in the book. I said, "Hey, tell Pat that my great great granddad came from Ireland through Boston and made his way out this way to Kansas before he slipped down into Indian territory. Just tell him that my great great granddad's buried in the Indian cemetery about 20 miles from my house. And he came over from Dublin. And within an hour, literally, he said, "Hey, as soon as you can get out here, he'll talk to you." What we did is myself and my partner at that time, we got the chief to make a phone call, and we got sworn in as U.S. Marshals. So we headed out to that. That was the final piece that we needed to get the DA to file a charge. We had a deal with the DA that he was going to keep this under wraps. Nobody was going to know about it until we got there and got in place to arrest Paul Rico. We went out there, got with the Marshals Task Force out. We all went to Rico's Miami Beach condominium about 6 in the morning. We just confirmed that the warrant was active. It's all good. So I beat on the door. And over the years, I had kind of gone toe to toe with Rico at least half a dozen times. So I'm beating on his door at 6 in the morning. He said, "Who is it?" I said, "Hey, it's Sergeant Mike Huff from Tulsa Police." I heard his wife say, "What do you need? We've talked to you enough times." And I said, "Well, you need to open the door." So I opened the door. I got a warrant for first degree murder. He under arrest for murder of Roger Wheeler. And he kind of stumbled back to a chair, fell down, and he was in his boxer shorts, stuff. I said, "You need to go in your bedroom. We'll take you in there. You put some clothes on because you're going to jail." I told his wife, I said, "Does he have some medicine he needs to take with him?" She goes, "Yeah, he's diabetic." And so she got a handful of pill bottles, put them in a sack. I said, "Well, if he's diabetic, he might need to eat something for breakfast because you might not get some at jail." And his wife said, "Hey, put your World Highlight cashmere sweater on. They'll get a kick out of that." And I said, "Well, we're going to get a kick out of it, but this is no joke. This is
Really?
this is a big deal that's happening here. You need to realize that." So we took him to Dade County Jail. We go in there, and that smells like a third world country in there. I mean, it's a big city jail.
Yeah.
We're standing in line waiting to get booked in. There is some sort of foreigner standing right in front of us, and he had a goiter on his neck about the size of a cantaloupe, and it was leaking pus.
Oh my
And
God.
he smelled terrible, like he hadn't had a bath for weeks. Rico turned around and looked at me, and he said, "Are you really doing this to me?" And I said, "Well, you kind of did it to yourself. As soon as we get you up to the front of the line, we'll be through with you, and I'll see you back in Tulsa."
Kind of ends up sad for H. Paul Rico. He will eventually die while in custody. I guess after he got to, he had bad health problems at the time, and he'll eventually die in custody when he gets down to Tulsa, if I read this right.
But I'm filling out the booking sheet in a room at Dade County Homicide Squad on Rico. I'm just, asking questions, height, weight, all that kind of stuff. And he kind of sneers at me. "How old are your kids?" And that stopped me in my tracks. And I looked up at him and I said, "What the F did you say?" And he said, "How old are your effing kids?" And I said, "Look, old man, I don't have a problem hitting you or choking you out because you're not gonna threaten my kids." So that was the end of that.
Interesting comment by him. That's I tell you what, I just talked about this in a show not too long ago. Those kind of a veiled threats that mob guys do that you can't really say it's a threat by the words
Yes, sir.
alone. You would have to know the context, the relationship between the two people talking. You have to know a whole lot more than the threat in that, how old are your kids? We had a guy here in Kansas City that just read off the names and ages of a guy's kids. He
Oh
could say,
my
"Well,
gosh.
that's all I'm doing, just reading off the guy's names of the kids and their ages. I didn't mean anything by it. I mean, that is so mob. That is the epitome of the veiled mob threat, the skillful mob threat. Interesting. All
Yes.
right,
Well, I
Mike.
guess I got it across to Rico that I wasn't happy with him because
Yeah,
he wound up crapping in his pants in that interview room.
yeah. It's
So,
sad in for him,
it's
but his family. But that's you play, you got to pay. Is what I find.
run a all volunteer cold case task force for the sheriff's office.
Hmm.
And I tell you, when you walk up to somebody 20 years after they did something and you're able to arrest them, it's better than having a foot chase running down a serial killer. I mean, it's for something they thought they got away with decades
Yeah,
before.
yeah.
And those families, uh, they sure appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, and guys, let me tell you something. I didn't think there's anything better than getting in a foot chase and catching the guy and putting the cuffs on him, but that probably is better.
Yes, sir. It's fun.
All right, Mike Huff, former Tulsa PD, and what's the name of the book, Mike? Remind me again.
Killing My Father. And it's the inside story of the biggest FBI corruption scandal in history.
Mm. And it's by the son, Mike Wheeler, the son of the man who was killed. And you,
Yeah, David Wheeler, me,
they,
and
they,
a
okay.
guy, a published author by the name of Larry Yaden. He has written about 14 books. We met him as he got in touch with us while he's writing a dual biography on Mr. Wheeler and Whitey Bulger, who both grew up in Boston on different sides of town at the
I'll be
same
darned.
time.
I didn't know
And
that.
yes, that's a good book too. It's called One Murder Too Many because
Mm,
out of all the murders that Bulger did and all the crimes, this was the one that brought him down.
interesting.
It was one murder too many for him.
All right. All right. Mike Huff. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, guys, that's been quite a story, hasn't it? I tell you what, it's nothing like hearing the real nuts and bolts of background of a good long homicide investigation. There's so many little bits and pieces that have to come together, and the detective has to have this great memory in order to when you get somebody that's confessing or you think might have done it, they start giving you details about that crime scene that nobody else could know. That's when you know you got the right guy. So this has been a great show and a really great guest. So check that book out. And don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles, so watch out for motorcycles when you're out there on the streets driving your big F-150s and your vans and all those kinds of things. If you have a problem with PTSD and you were in the service, be sure to go to the VA website. They've got a hotline number. And if you haven't been in the service and you've got any problems with drugs or alcohol or PTSD, get hold of help with Anthony Ruggiano. He's a former Gambino guy in recovery now. He's a drug and alcohol counselor, and on his website, he's got a YouTube channel. He's got a hotline number too. Maybe you can go into treatment with Anthony Ruggiano. That would be cool. I've always got things to sell. We've been selling Mike's book for a while. I've got my book, Leaving Vegas, How FBI Wiretaps In and Mob Domination of Las Vegas Casinos. I've got my books that are from my podcast shows, Windy City Mafia, the Chicago Outfit, and Big Apple Mafia, stories from the five families. I've got a whole bunch of stories from my old podcast shows in those books. And you can rent my DVDs on Amazon. So just go to Amazon and run my name, Gary Jenkins and Mafia, and you'll find all the stuff I got to sell. So thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate y'all tuning in. Be sure and like and subscribe and tell your friends about us. Make share this on your social media. A lot of people like this podcast, I know, and get us more listeners. We like more listeners. Thanks, guys.